And what a fall session it was. The cop on the elections, ethics, and campaign finance beat was fired. There are new limits on John Doe's secret investigations of politicians, and there is a new campaign finance rulebook for next year's elections. To discuss all this and more, thanks to Sean Johnson, Capitol Bureau Chief for Wisconsin Public Radio, Jesse Opoyan of the Capitol Times, Patrick Marley of the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, and Bob Hague, News Director, Wisconsin Radio Network. Okay, we've had a few days to come up for air after a very entertaining session. Of those, each of you, of those three major bills that I talked about, GAB and campaign finance and John Doe, most important and why? Bob, you love to go first.
I do love to go first, Steve. Thanks very much. Well, for me, it's the GAB, but it's partly because I was there when Robin Vos fired the first shot across Kevin Kennedy's bow. It was at a WisPolitics luncheon, as a matter of fact. And I don't remember the exact quote now, but Robin said, in effect, Kevin Kennedy has got to go. And at that point, we knew that that the GAB's days, I guess, were limited. So for me, that's been the story that I've really been following.
Most important of the trifecta bills. Patrick.
I don't know how you can sort of, the GAB bill and the campaign finance bill are really interlinked, I think, because the campaign finance law changes the rules or makes clear what the rules are, loosens them a little bit. And the GAB is the body that used to enforce them. Now it'll be in the hands of this new bipartisan commission. So I think it's a big change when you take those two together.
And Jesse, welcome to Capitol Roundtable. Welcome to Wisconsin Eye.
Thank you.
Your nominee.
It's good to be here. And I think I have to agree with Bob, it's the GAB, but also with Patrick that all these three are so intertwined that it's hard to separate one effect from another. But the GAB is the entity that oversees all of these functions that the other bills regulate. You know, this is the entity in charge of overseeing our elections and making sure elected officials are acting appropriately. So, you know, there's a lot of, the stakes are high on that one.
Thanks, Jesse. Sean?
I think the campaign finance bill long term is the biggest. I think there are so many opportunities now for state elected officials or candidates for state office to coordinate with these groups, and I mean really coordinate with these groups that keep their donors secret. I think that's a huge change. I think that the way that it allows, it blesses money going to legislative campaign committees is going to, year after year, it's going to strengthen legislative leaders, and I think it'll make rank and file lawmakers less and less relevant. So I think that's a big change. I think John Doe is actually a close second, maybe, because the avenues for investigating public officials, they're kind of getting cut off with that one.
Yep. So, I want to talk about the mechanics in the abolishing GAB. So, who's going to run elections, and when is this change creating ethics in elections? So, what are the mechanics?
So I think that the new law goes into effect at the beginning of the year, but you leave the GAB in place for the first half of the year. So they run the spring elections for Supreme Court and some local
primaries
offices.
in April.
But it gives time for the legislative leaders and the governor to appoint members to these new commissions. They sort of get up to speed, and then on July 1 you have this switch over where the new commissions are in charge. The GAB is totally dissolved.
Legi's leadership is completely in charge of who serves on these two boards, right? Elections and ethics. They even give the governor a list of who he must appoint.
Yeah.
Is that part of it, Jesse?
Yeah, that's correct. So obviously, as Sean was talking about, the power kind of shifting from rank and file to legislative leaders, that is a whole new set of powers for those leaders.
Those of us that have been around a long time, maybe too long, remember the old elections board. There was a member appointed by the Supreme Court. That was a non-starter, right?
Right.
That's gone?
Right, and the elections board used to have members appointed directly by the political parties. That's gone as well. Unless, like, you have a situation where a third party does well in an election, then they get a seat at the table, and then I think in that case the Libertarians or the Green Party would get to appoint a member by the party.
We have 3 R's and 3 D's on both the elections and the ethics commissions, correct? What if they can't agree on an administrator? What happens then?
Well, it goes to the legislature. Under an amendment that they added in the Senate, it would go to a joint committee on
legislative organization, I think.
Or committee?
Which is run by Republicans right now. So essentially, it would be left to, right now, Republican leadership would get to pick their elections chief and their the head of the Ethics Commission to the administrators.
Is that a provision, go back to your Kevin Kennedy example, to make sure that Mr. Kennedy isn't part of the Elections Commission, do you think, Bob?
I wouldn't want to speculate as to why that precision.
Do you want to give
provision
Mr.
would-
Kennedy any career advice, Mr. Haig?
I guess Kevin probably has to have his resume ready at this point. Yeah. But I don't want to. I mean, it certainly would seem that way, but I don't want to speculate as to what leadership was thinking on that.
I want to come back to a point that Sean made and elaborate on it. There are so many provisions to the campaign finance law. Remember McCain-Feingold? Nobody predicted that it would yield what it did. Your thoughts on which provisions, and I know I've got a summary of 5 or 6, which of them are in effect most important and are going to be really reshape the election landscape in 2016? Sean, go back to something you said. So which one of these many changes?
If I had to pick one,
Yeah.
I guess I think the biggest is going to be just allowing for pretty much unfettered coordination between candidates and interest groups, because the whole idea of campaign finance, I mean, we have these limits in law, and we have these reports, and it's all, in theory, it's supposed to provide transparency so that, if people are supporting legislators, you as a public have a right to know who's backing them. And that's kind of gone if you can coordinate with a group that by law is allowed to keep its donors secret and raise unlimited amounts of money. I mean, I just think that's where the money is going to flow.
Okay. Jesse, your thoughts
I
on
think
that?
it's absolutely the coordination aspect. And some would argue that this is inevitable and it's a result of court decisions more than the law itself, but others would argue that the law is actually going farther than the court decisions would necessitate. But this does open up a whole new world of secrecy, I guess.
John Jagler stood up on the floor when they were debating campaign finance, looked at the Democrats and said, your gripe is not with us, your gripe is with the Supreme Court and Citizens United. Is that a fair criticism, Patrick?
In part, I mean, the state Supreme Court decision shutting down the John Doe of Walker, I think, really did open this door to more coordination. At the same time, I agree with Jesse that the law that they passed goes further than any court decision and allows more coordination than they were required to allow by the courts. So Jagler has a point to a certain extent. Many of the things the Democrats want to do are things that you could not do under U.S. and state Supreme Court precedent. But at the same time, this law that they passed does not have to take the form that the Republicans gave it.
Bob, your thought?
My thought is actually a question. So does this new landscape of greater and more coordination mean that the run-up to elections is going to be even more aggravating for voters than it has been in the past, i.e. more television ads, more radio ads, because the airwaves are saturated at this point?
So are you saying more confusion by voters on who the heck is paying for this
More
ad?
confusion and more aggravation, just in terms of the amount of messages that they're being bombarded with.
Can we all agree that they made it harder for journalists like us to trace the source of this, of some of these contributions?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Especially
Yes.
when you say you don't have to disclose your employer, but somebody could just list a career as investor or entrepreneur, correct?
Absolutely,
Right.
yeah.
I mean, this has been, the occupation is something that we've all tracked pretty closely. So this is a major, well, but you can still do data searches on this person that gave a lot of money. So how big of a problem is it, and is it just a problem for journalists?
And I think for people who have given existing donors, we at least kind of have this background of information, and yes, obviously with the internet, people have a LinkedIn profile or they have information out there. It's not terribly hard to find someone who's high profile, but there's something to be said for having that right next to the name when you're looking through. And maybe it's just journalists, but people are reading the things that journalists are putting out from that information.
Well,
yeah, I mean, it's the best way to figure out trends in campaign finance giving to candidates, that you can look up an individual who gives the maximum donation. Those have always been easy to figure out. But what might be not as apparent initially is that a bunch of $500 donations, when you see who the employer is, you find it as a group they gave, say, $50,000 to a candidate. That's significant. That'll be harder to know. That's bad for journalists, but more importantly, it's bad for the public because they won't have that information.
But Voss defended this provision that you don't have to list your employer, just your general vocation, saying that there have been boycotts of companies that are unfair because CEOs don't determine what their employees give. So what's the other side of that? Patrick, you've done a lot of work
I mean,
on it.
the other side of it is that you have to give that information at the federal level. You've had to give it since the 1970s, if not before, in Wisconsin. People know when you give money, you're publicly saying that you support a candidate. You're giving your name, your address, your occupation. To ask for employers, not that much more would be the other argument, and it's a longstanding tradition here.
Well, I just have one more point on this. I really find it a big change that they're going to be able to, that corporations are going to be able to donate. Is there any limit on how much they can give to some of these ledge campaigns? Is there any limit now?
Yeah,
So
$12,000 a year. Initially, it was going to be
Originally it
unlimited,
would've been, yeah.
but now they're saying $12,000 a year.
that was a change
They kept
added
it
by
in the
the
Senate.
Added by the
Yeah.
Senate.
Yeah.
Okay. And there's Governor Walker. Do we know when he's going to sign these bills on GAB and campaign finance?
I'm guessing tomorrow at about 5.
Thanks, Bob, for the precision. Let's talk about Governor Walker. In the post-presidential White House, he's doing the tour, the Kiss and Make Up tour. But here's my question. Did he have a large hand in writing the GAB and campaign finance bills, or was he pretty much hands-off while he's off on the Kiss and Make Up tour? What are your thoughts?
If he did, we haven't seen it, I would
Yeah.
say.
What are we seeing when he is available to the media now? How accessible is Governor Walker on the statewide tour?
Off and on, he's less accessible. I'd
Less?
say. Yeah, well,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, recently, it's unusual. I mean, I think during the presidential campaign, you kind of got used to the fact that you're not going to see your governor very much. Then afterward, is kind of starting this tour of Wisconsin again. You're seeing him quite a bit, and then just sort of off the mat there for a little while. And traditionally, he would always take questions at the end of events. That's sometimes yes, sometimes no. Now.
I've noticed his office has deleted that last sentence. The governor may or may not take
Yeah.
questions depending on time.
Yeah.
Is that a significant change? Do people like us not know whether to go to all these events because we don't know whether he'll
Well,
take follow?
we just call and ask.
Do you always get the correct answer?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's not been terribly successful for us all the time, that we say, is he going to take questions at an event? And they say, we'll let you know. And then after the event, they'll say, oh, he took questions. Well, if we decided not to go, that's not terribly helpful.
Right. And he appeared with Bush and Rubio when they were here prior to the debates. Was that tantamount to any endorsement? What do you think, Jesse?
No, I don't think so. And they've tried to make that pretty clear too. Obviously a lot of legislative leaders have thrown their support to Rubio, and some who were supporting
Senator
the governor.
Gutnier, Speaker Voss.
Yep.
They're with Rubio. Who else is with Rubio? There's a list of 20.
There's a
Yeah,
bunch of
Congressman
the
Duffy
Senators.
is with him.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a pretty large chunk of the assembly, at least, has announced that. But for all intents and purposes, they've said they're not going to be making an endorsement, the governor, anytime soon.
And does he continue to say, I would not accept a cabinet appointment? That was what he said when he got out of the presidential race. Has he said that lately?
I don't know that anyone has asked
I haven't
him
heard him
lately.
ask
Yeah.
again lately. He was more firm on that than on other
Sure.
questions. I mean, a
He-
little squishy on would you be vice president? Because who wouldn't be probably. But
Good
Sweet
point,
game.
Sean.
but on the cabinet appointment, I think for him it sounded pretty firm to the point that it would be quite a big flop for him to take an appointment.
So Sean thinks the governor's kind of been less accessible since he got out of the White House race. Would you other three agree?
Well, he hasn't had any events this week. And there's been a lot of interest in whether or not he's going to have events this week so that people can ask him about Syrian refugees. My sense is, and I've been at just a couple of events in the last 4 weeks or so, he seemed fairly accessible. He took the usual amount of questions at both of those. Yeah.
Well, so he said, I'm going to do the statewide tour to kind of, hey, I'm back full-time governing in Wisconsin. What's your impression? Do you think most Wisconsin voters have kind of forgiven him for, remember the polls say they didn't want him to run for president. So is he earning back their trust and respect? Just your gut reaction in this tour.
I don't know. I mean, he did go on this tour, but he hasn't really had an agenda. Right as he dropped out of the presidential race, the next day or 2 days later, he came out for this civil service reform. But that wasn't his idea. That was something that was generated by the legislature, and he latched onto it. And it's been like that ever since. It's been 2 months now. He hasn't put forward his own ideas of what he wants to do. As to what the public thinks of him, the last Marquette poll had him with very bad numbers in the high 30s.
And we'll see what the new one is today.
Right.
Excuse me.
We'll find out new numbers. But I think it would, it's going to take him some time to rebuild that. And I think even some of his backers are concerned that, well, when you're at 37%, there's sort of only one way to go. But some real concern there of, can you get back to 50? Do you now have a ceiling of 45 or 46? That's what he's really got to focus on if he wants to run again in 2018.
Let's talk about the Democrats. If we had $1 for every time we heard open for corruption, we could have a very nice party. Is that an effective offense for them to run? Just open for corruption? Bob, what do you think?
I don't think so.
You don't think it's an effective soundbite? Why?
No. Well, because the voters who are already predisposed to support Democrats aren't going to disagree with that.
Yeah.
Okay? That magical small percentage of voters who are on the bubble, in my view, are probably going to resent the implication that corruption is rife in their beloved Wisconsin. I just don't see that as a convincing argument that is going to sway voters who are participating in statewide elections or legislative races.
Anybody else on that? Whether that's an effective offense for the Dems?
I mean, I think it helps muddy the water on this campaign finance and GAB as the Republicans are going out making their arguments for them. They say no. This opens the door to corruption. I think that works as sort of a tit for tat, but I agree with Bob that as a sort of campaign issue that's not at the top of the minds of the public. It's sort of like when they go out and they talk about redistricting. Campaign finance is confusing even to lawyers who specialize in it. And to, the public's easily confused because it's a naturally confusing issue, and they're more worried about, the state of the economy, terrorism, these kinds of things. So I think, the tax climate, those are the things that will dominate, I would think, in the fall.
Any PSs on that, Jesse or Sean?
And I think a counter to the beloved Wisconsin argument too is that a lot of people already expect government to be, corrupt or at the very least, not very effective. So you're not going to convince people who already think that this is somehow worse.
Sean?
I think the corruption argument in a way gets made every election cycle. And you look back at John Doe 1, Tim Russell, a close advisor to then County Executive Scott Walker, was charged with some pretty nasty stuff. I mean, embezzling veterans funds. Did not affect a recall election or his reelection campaign. So open for corruption, maybe not. I think when you hear them talking about, boy, you guys have been in power for how many years now, and this is what you're talking about, maybe that has more legs.
Well, that was kind of my next question. Thanks, Sean. When I make a list of the major policy decisions that have been made since Governor Walker took office and the Republicans took office in 2011, I come up with 25. So here's my question. Have the Republicans given Democrats any real live issues that might really catch on in next year's election? What do you think? So forget about the soundbite, open for corruption, but specific issues, will GAB resonate? Will John Doe resonate? What are your thoughts? Are there live issues that the Democrats can mind?
I don't think those issues would resonate as well as WEDC would be an issue for Democrats.
Okay.
The Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation has had troubles from the start. It seems to continue to have them. That's something where people can see a connection to the economy, right or wrong, when they see things like the Oscar Mayer plant closing and the Democrats try to draw that connection. I think you can resonate with some voters that way.
I think it's been interesting in the last few debates. We've seen both sides talking a little bit about student loan debt and how to address it, and indications that there might actually be some room to work together on that. It sounds like Democrats have a proposal that they're floating, they're trying to push, and Robin Voss said, hey, I'll send this back to the Joint Finance Committee, we should talk about it. It sounds like Republicans are on board with a lot of the provisions in the proposal besides the refinancing aspect of it, but there's a conversation that started that it sounds like might continue.
Voss also seemed to offer to work with the Democrats on restructuring WEDC, which kind of surprised me. Is that kind of a head fake, or do you think he's serious about listening to Barca, a former employee of the U.S. Small Business Administration? Do you see WEDC getting restructured next year, John?
It depends how big. It sounds like from what he said at the Journal Sentinel editorial board meeting. I'm not sure how that came up, Patrick, but
he kind of volunteered it. It was a big surprise to me.
He did?
I mean,
it just came on it?
Yeah.
Okay.
the very fact that they're talking about that, I think, tells you that issue has, some force behind it. And you think back to before the first debate, presidential debate, when Scott Walker and Jeb Bush were both considered, in that pack of front runners.
Yep.
And Jeb Bush let a few opposition talking points, magically appear on his website, and then we took them down. One of them was about WEDC, about Walker and Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation, which tells me they thought, even at the national level, they thought that issue had some oomph behind it. So
But
that
then
could
it
be
was
one
taken
that
down?
it was
It was
just whoops, gosh, I
there
don't know
for
how that got there.
nanosecond.
Yeah, enough so
It
that you
was.
could see that we're thinking about it, but and they took it down. So I think that's maybe something. And if you look at where the governor's numbers sort of fell off this, around 50% mark that he's been at since Marquette started its poll, it was around the time of the budget. So I think that budget has something to it, and it was around the time that he started running for president. So I think those two issues probably have more weight than some of the stuff they've been talking about lately in next year's election.
Okay, time's getting away from this. There
Yeah.
are only two more things I want to cover. Were you all surprised at the 10-6 vote in finance to authorize an additional $350 million? We're talking 6 Assembly Republicans and all 4 Democrats. Surprising, Bob?
Yeah, I was. And this has been kind of an issue that I've just been fascinated by.
Me too.
You recall the report that was issued by the commission headed by Transportation Secretary Gottlieb that landed with a thud. Thank you very much for your year of work, and now we're just going to file this someplace.
Borrow the money.
And borrow money. And now, almost as if by magic, we're hearing some leadership talking about not referencing the report, mind you, but talking about taking a closer look at some of the suggestions that were raised in that report. So,
Well, remember the Democrats, when they got in the final stages of the budget, they offered to go back to indexing. So I think you have the Barkas and the Erpenbachs out there saying, hey, we're willing to talk about some revenue raisers. Nobody will ever say tax increases. But any other thoughts on that 10-6 vote? It was just stunning to me.
I mean, I think this thing just incrementally, it's been building for 10 years as to what to do on roads, and everybody's been just sort of pushing it off, and things like this 10-6 vote show that we're getting closer and closer to a point at which real decisions have to be made, that you're running out of options. You have to get to a point where you're either gonna spend more on roads, I mean you're gonna find the money for roads, or you're gonna max out the credit card to the hilt, or you're gonna pull back on work, and they've got to make a decision, and there are 3 options.
Well, Senator Erpenbach said, look, the governor's got to lead on this issue. Do you look for his next budget to recommend again borrowing $1.3 billion, Sean? Or do you look for him to come up with, I won't say tax and fee, let's say revenue raise?
actually, I think we're calling the gas tax a user fee now,
Oh,
if I'm
okay.
not mistaken. Yeah.
He keeps saying that it's got to be offset with a tax cut somewhere else. So I think it depends on whether the economy grows fast enough to keep up with state spending where they've got it projected, and whether you're going to have any money to cut taxes so you can raise a gas tax, for example. Because I don't see him doing it.
Do you
any
see him
other
leading
way.
on transportation funding, Jesse?
Well, it would be something to lead on.
Thanks. That's a good comment.
Representative Nygren is calling for bottom-up solutions. He wants the municipalities and the counties and the voters, right, to have buy-in on any sort of future program for financing transportation.
Okay, it's a busy day in the Capitol. Here's my last question. Bills that will pass next year, and I want to start with, do you expect with the fetal tissue research ban, which was debated hotly for a period of weeks and then it's fallen off the table. What do you expect to vote on that or any other bill that will get passed next session, which opens in January? Sean, go.
On that?
Well,
Why don't
sure.
I have to answer that first?
Sure. Fetal tissue.
I'll say yes.
You expect some type of fetal
Yeah,
tissue?
I think
To
something.
clear both houses? Because
something.
it's not cleared either house yet.
I know.
Okay.
But on the spot, I'll say yes.
All right,
And
and
then
then-
another issue,
Yep.
let's say this nuclear moratorium that came up
Yeah, that
ending the nuclear moratorium, the moratorium on new nuclear plants.
Erasing
Remember-
our 1983 ban on nuclear power plants.
Yeah, I mean, you remember when that came up a few sessions back and a few sessions before that, it was pretty controversial, right?
Yeah.
Got people going, and nobody testified against it yesterday, and that's partly because environmental groups say it's not going to happen, and nuclear power is not economically feasible anyway, so the market's kind of going to take care of that issue for us. But there are other people who say, look, I'm an environmentalist, I want to reduce carbon in the atmosphere, nuclear is one way to do it.
So you see that as a live issue for the session next year?
I think could be.
Okay.
Yeah.
Jesse, prediction?
Well, fetal tissue, I'm going to cheat and say maybe, because it's not just the UW that is opposed to this, it's a lot of the business community, it's Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce, and I think that plays a role in at least giving it some hang-ups.
Yeah.
As for something else, I think it's pretty much a given that this bipartisan marquee effort toward heroin and opiate prevention, that package of bills, the first package passed with pretty much unanimous support, and I think that the second package should go through pretty easily.
Okay. Patrick?
Fetal tissue, I'm going to say I don't think it passes for the reasons that Jesse cited. And I think the big debate that we'll see in the spring is over minimum markup. I don't know that that'll go anywhere, but there's really some momentum among some Republicans. It's an issue that doesn't fall clearly on party lines. And I think after the success they had with right to work and with prevailing wage, they'll see an opening to get that through.
Bob, you have the first word. We'll give you the last one.
I would expect this 5 strikes you're out OWI legislation that would take licenses away for 10 years for these repeat offenders, and I think the magic phrase here is there's no fiscal estimate. There's no fiscal note attached to this, so it seems like a gimme.
Okay. Well, I understand that some of you got to go up to the 10 o'clock bill or public hearing on the bill that would ban transgender students from using school restrooms designated for the sex with which they identify. So I want to respect your time. Thanks, Sean. Thanks, Jesse. Thanks, Patrick. Thank you, Bob. Capital Roundtable adjourned.